Welcome to the Congressional Candidates Forum sponsored by the Indiana Armstrong Patriots. Tonight, the candidates for the Republican nomination for the United States House of Representatives for Pennsylvania's 9th District will be discussing their positions on the issues in response to questions submitted by the audience. The primary election is Tuesday, May 20th. The winner of the Republican primary will face the Democratic nominee in the general election November 4th. The candidate elected then will represent the district in the 114th Congress for a two-year term, January 5th, 2015 to January 3rd, 2017. Now, according to Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, House members' qualifications must be to be at least 25 years old, a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years prior to election, and a resident of the state he or she is chosen to represent. Those are the qualifications for the election. The salary for the position is $174,000. The House of Representatives has 435 seats. Pennsylvania has 18 districts. The 9th District has 646,628 in population, constituents. And that district includes Indiana, Fayette, Blair, Bedford, Fulton, and Franklin counties in their entirety, and parts of Cambria, Somerset, Westmoreland, Washington, Greene, and Huntingdon counties. Now, the forum is intended for the information and education of the voters. The organizers make no endorsements of the candidates for the office, and as such, the forum will be conducted to allow as much information to be presented by the candidates. The candidates will have 3 minutes for introductory statements and then 2 minutes for each question. Candidates will also be allowed 1 minute for rebuttal when necessary. The candidates earlier drew lots to determine the order in which they'll answer the questions or give rebuttals. The candidates will then take turns in offering the first response to each question, but the sequence will stay the same. It'll begin with the opening statements. First to speak will be Bill Schuster, second Art Halverson, and third Travis Schooley. When the questions begin, Mr. Halverson will move up to first, Mr. Schooley will move to second, and Mr. Schuster will move to third for the first question. And let's get right into this with the opening statements. First, Mr. Bill Schuster.
Well, thank you, Chauncey, and thank all of you for being here tonight. As to echo what Tom Smith said, thanks for caring, thanks for being out, thanks for participating in this process. Special thanks to Tom Smith, who's really been one of the leaders out there to take back our government and to regain our freedoms that we all know that we continue to lose. And his run for the U.S. Senate in 2012, Tom, got to thank you for that. That was a tough thing to do, run statewide, but you did it with great honor and great dignity, so we appreciate that greatly. And also to thank you to Mr. Halverson and Mr. Schooley for being here tonight, and most importantly to thank the people of the 9th Congressional District for giving me the honor to serve you, to represent you in Washington in the U.S. Congress. I appreciate the faith that you've put in me to represent your values and your interests, and I'm proud of the record that I've established as a proven conservative. Also, in representing the people, helping people, over thousands of constituents we've helped on matters with Social Security, Veterans Affairs, the communities we've helped, dozens and dozens of communities to help them with the problems that they face dealing with the federal government. But as I said, I have a proven conservative record, voting to cut and control spending, voting to reduce regulations, getting to get our financial house back in order, to make sure this economy gets back on track. And the way to do that is to cut spending, is to keep taxes low, is to reduce regulation. So we have a growing, prosperous economy, and that'll help cure many, many of our ills we have in this country today. Now, I fought every step of the way against Obamacare. I voted against it from the beginning. I offered amendments and legislation to stop it. But even more important, I think, in some regards, is that I've offered a solution. I offered a vision 4 or 5 years ago about what we should do, and that's to keep choice, more choice for patients, make sure the patient-doctor relationship stays intact, make sure that we can have tort reform so that we reduce the burdens of the legal system on our medical system, making sure we can pull together and buy insurance across state lines. Those are just some of them. I fought to allow Pennsylvania to develop its energy, whether it's coal, to stop this war on coal that the Obama administration has put in place, or to stop this administration from over-regulating the development of our natural gas. Now, That'll help America. It'll help Pennsylvania to regain its footing. But when you look at Pennsylvania's history, it was oil and gas, it was oil and coal that really propelled us to one of the key economic engines of the United States. And today we have that opportunity. It's a godsend for us to be able to have this natural gas and to make sure that we're able to extract it from the earth and put it into play for manufacturers and creating jobs in this country. I've been a strong advocate for our military and for our veterans, making sure America has the military strength to secure and to ensure our security here at home and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, words matter. We all know that actions speak louder than words. And I'm proud of my conservative record. I have an 89% lifetime voting record with the American Conservative Union, the gold standard for conservatives.
That's 3 minutes.
Excuse me?
That's 3 minutes.
And I consistently have received endorsements of the National Right to Life and the NRA and the Chamber of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, I humbly ask for you to support me again to represent you in the United States Congress.
For the benefit of our candidates, and I'm sorry if I blindsided you here, but our timekeepers, we have timekeepers here tonight watching a close watch on the candidates.
I can see you there. I don't know.
Sure. Once I give you the green light, the timekeeper will give you the yellow caution sign when you have 30 seconds remaining, and the red stop sign is stop. And if the can,
thank you. I can see you.
he'll be right here, and
Thank you.
if you don't see it, I will. Next, with his introductory statement, candidate Art Halverson.
Well, I too want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. You're great Americans for coming out on this beautiful evening. You could be home working on your garden, but you've chosen to be here with us and to learn about these candidates and enable yourself and inform yourself to make a very important decision coming up here in less than a month. Also, Indiana Armstrong Patriots for hosting this first forum, slant debate. I appreciate that, and obviously the leadership of Julie Anderson and Tom Smith must not be understated. Mr. Ross, thank you for stepping up and moderating this, keeping these war horses from attacking each other. That'll be a tough job maybe, but we'll try to restrain ourselves. My wife is here. Thank you. Paula, you're the love of my life. And I also want to thank my God, my Heavenly Father. The way I'd like to introduce myself in these short minutes that we have is to tell a quick story. Would give some insight into my life and the values that I have developed into my character. My dad was the youngest son of 8 children, came off an Iowa farm during World War II and served in the Navy. He settled down after the war in Rhode Island, met my mother, who was a second-generation Swedish immigrant. They married and had 4 children. I'm the oldest of those 4. We didn't have very much, but we had enough. And the reason we had enough is because the work ethic that my parents modeled to me was nothing short of amazing. In fact, my father is 86 years old, and he still works. He was recently down at our farm here in Pennsylvania helping us break it out for the spring. And that work ethic that I saw modeled in them, I have been able to emulate through my life, and it has served us well. But there was one particular defining moment in my life that stood above all others, and that was, as a young child, my parents heard of a family of 7 children whose mother had died. And they immediately, without hesitation, embraced that family, received them into our house, and helped raise those children. And I saw modeled before my very eyes the virtues of faith and family and generosity. And I saw that throughout my life through my parents, but particularly in that instance. And I've sought to emulate that as well through my life, and it has served me well. But as I've crisscrossed this district, I've seen those same virtues of faith, family, and generosity in the people of this great central band of Pennsylvania called the 9th Congressional District. And so tonight, I would ask for your vote, and I would ask you to send me to Washington to apply that work ethic, to be a vote and a voice for your virtues and your values in Washington. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with his opening statement, candidate Travis Schooley.
Hi, everyone. I thank everyone for being here tonight. Like was already echoed, being here tonight is a sacrifice, and I thank everyone for being here and for the Indiana Armstrong Patriots to host this event. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about myself here. So, I'm in this race first and foremost because of a spiritual and political conviction. It began some years ago. And I'm grateful to live in a country where a working man can run for Congress. It might be difficult, but, you know, for me that means that perhaps the American dream is still alive. There's a lot to overcome, but we've been working very hard in the field, and I'm grateful to all the people that we've met along the way, and I've learned a lot. But to tell you a little bit about myself here, I'm 39 years old. I regard myself as a constitutional conservative Republican. I've always been a Republican. I'm as conservative as any conservative voter would have me be. And so I've been married to my wife now for 13 years. We have 3 wonderful children. We're blessed to have them, ages 4 to 1. I'm a busy man, so I also raise livestock, and my wife runs another business out of the home, and Daddy's a full-time worker and running for Congress. There's not a whole lot of time left for anything else, I can tell you right at the moment. But we persevere on. So I was born in 1974 in McConnellsburg, Fulton County, and I was raised in Franklin County. If you don't know where that's at, it's on the opposite end of the district, just west of Adams County. I've been here my whole life, and all the way back to before this was a nation. Both sides of my family have been here their whole lives. And for me, that means something. We've always had a part of our culture that we know where our Revolutionary War gravestones are. And for me, that means I can't violate the memory of their sacrifice. And it drives me. My faith drives me, and so does my heritage. And this has been put upon me, and I won't back away. So ultimately, I will be okay with the outcome as a man of faith. But I must first be obedient. Our country's falling apart. We all know that. So I joined the Army in 1993, right after high school graduation. And I worked before I went in the Army, and I've worked ever since. I have over a 20-year work history. The last dozen years, while Bill Schuster's been in Congress, I've been down at the local level. I've managed a municipal authority, and I've worked in a civil engineering firm where I've had to deal with 2 to 3 dozen agencies, federal, state, local, to get projects approved, hospitals, churches,
3 minutes,
schools.
Mr. Schooley.
And so I rest on my experience at the local level. It's valuable. So I thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The candidates appreciate your response and your support. For the rest of the forum, though, we kindly ask that they can appreciate your attention and respect, and please withhold applause until the end of the forum so they have the greatest possible amount of time to inform you about their candidacies. You'll have the chance to meet and talk with the candidates as well following the question and answer session. So let's continue. Our first question, and the first to answer this evening is Art Halverson. The question is, what is the impact of Congress repeatedly increasing the debt ceiling without making changes to reduce future spending? The impact of increasing the debt ceiling without making changes to reduce future spending.
Well, the impact in real terms is that we've gone, in the term that Bill Schuster's been in Congress, from $6.8 trillion debt to nearly $18 trillion debt. There's been over an $11 trillion debt increase since Mr. Schuster's been in Congress. The impact on the economy is that it has robbed capital from the private sector and transferred it into the public sector. And so we have an increase in the size of the federal government, the size, the scope, and the intrusiveness of the federal government to the extent where they're involved in every aspect of our lives. That needs to be stopped. It needs to be reversed. The private sector literally is being strangled by the effect of this debt that has been incurred by the federal government. And unless we reverse this and turn it around so that we can grow the private sector by reducing the size of the public sector, the federal government, we're not going to make it. We have reached the edge. We talked about a fiscal cliff on January 1st of 2013, and that's a very appropriate metaphor for the condition that we're in as a country. We have zero margin, and the next big impact, a shock, if you will, to our economy is very likely to put us over that edge.
Mr. Schooley, the same question. What is the impact of Congress repeatedly increasing the debt ceiling without making changes to reduce future spending?
If we keep this practice up, we're going to be in serious, serious trouble. We're already there, but we're threatening the dollar. We need to balance a budget. We need to spend within our limits. You at home have to do that, or you lose your home. Now, Congress needs to do the same thing. It's common sense on the streets. It seems like we've had an inability of Congress altogether to do that. And while I'm thankful for some of Bill Schuster's service, I don't see that he's held that line consistently. There's a grave danger to this. Alexander Tytler once had a quote some time ago. He said that when the public figures out a way to vote themselves money from the general treasury, the race is on to elect those that offer the most money to the people for whatever they want. And once that day starts, that government is doomed to fiscal collapse. If we look ourselves in the mirror, is that us? We have to change. We have to decide if we want the government to be our save all, our end all, or we have to decide if we want to be a free and independent people.
Thank you. And Congressman Schuster, what is the impact of Congress repeatedly increasing the debt ceiling without making changes to reduce future spending?
Well, there is no greater risk to our economy, to our national security, than the increasing debt that we see are piling on our children and our grandchildren. I've been one in Congress to vote for budgets to cut trillions of dollars to reduce that, because it is affecting our economy. It does freeze out the private sector. The money's not there for them to invest. It's the government taking more and more control of our economy, just like we've seen with Obamacare. And in the past, I've only voted for debt ceiling when I saw that there was cuts to the budget, when there were cuts in the spending, or that Republicans were in a place that we could control spending. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we've got to pay our bills. We've got to pay our bills, but we need to start by controlling spending. And everybody knows the problem in Washington is Barack Obama and Harry Reid. Because if you look over the past 3 years with Republican control of the House, we have cut spending 4 years in a row. That's not happened since Korea. So the Republicans have been the backstop, and we've sent hundreds of bills to the United States Senate, and it dies. The Senate has become known as the graveyard. Harry Reid kills bill after bill. The president backs him up and supports him. Ladies and gentlemen, this election, we have an opportunity to take back the United States Senate. And some of that great legislation, the good legislation that we've passed out of the House, will be able to be taken up in the Senate to be able to turn back the tide of this debt. Because what we do is pile it on top of our children and our grandchildren and future generations. And that's the wrong thing to do. So I'm going to continue to fight, continue to make those tough spending cuts, votes on those, continue to talk about reforming Social Security and Medicare without those folks that are retired today, those folks that are on Medicare today. But we have to reform Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, because if you don't reform those entitlements, we'll never get to the core of it. So if we're elected again, I'll continue to fight that fight in Washington.
Congressman, did you want to take any additional time to respond directly to the comment here, or are you satisfied with
satisfied.
You're good? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the second question, and it kind of dovetails in with the financial situations that we're talking about. The second question, what are your views on military spending? And the question goes on to ask, can substantial savings be achieved without jeopardizing national security? The First answer is Travis Schooley. Your views on military spending and can we save without compromising national security?
Well, I'm an Army man, and I do believe in a strong military. We need it. So I'm very cautious to cut anything from the military. I'm much more apt to cut in other areas. But it's a tough call because, you know, we're in a lot of places in the world, and we have to really look at our purse strings right now. The bottom line is we're spending way too much. So we have to look at every area. But we do definitely need a strong defensive postured military. And, you know, right now we're losing that battle. So China's gaining the edge on us. Technology. One of the things we looked at years ago when I was in the military is the dramatic rise of China as a world power and as a military, increasing training in all the technical aspects. They have drones. They have everything we have. There's no difference anymore. So we've lost that edge. We've given them that technology all the way back, dating back to the days of Clinton when we gave them the supercomputers with which they could use to target our continent with intercontinental ballistic missiles. So if we're not careful, we're going to have a real problem on our hands. But no, I don't want to cut military spending, and definitely when more so when it's defensive in nature. But so that's it.
Thank you. Congressman Schuster, same question. Views on military spending and can substantial savings be achieved without jeopardizing national security?
The security of this nation is the #1 responsibility of the United States Congress, of the federal government. #1. In our Constitution, it says provide for the common defense. Make sure that we are secure at home and secure when we go abroad and when we're able to push out and do the things we do commercially. That's the #1 responsibility. Are there places to cut spending? Yes, as long as it's not the muscle. And I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and a year or so ago, I was asked to be chair of a special panel to go around the country to talk to small, medium-sized businesses or institutions and talk to them about how difficult it is to do business with the Department of Defense. And it is extremely difficult. And we know right here in Indiana County, we have some defense contractors, small, medium-sized defense contractors. It's extremely difficult. We need reform. We need reform when we're buying these weapon systems. We need reform to be able to go out there and to look at our small and medium-sized companies. That's where the innovation is. That's where the breakthroughs are. But what happens is these big behemoths, who we need to have them, they're good, the Boeings, they're good to have, but we've got to do more to encourage our small and medium-sized businesses with those innovations to get more of that business. And we're not doing that now. There is a risk adverse over at the Department of Defense throughout all the government agencies. We have got to let those folks go out there and look around and find out where the best systems are, where the best processes are. So overall, we need to make sure we have a strong military and never cut into the muscle. When you look around the world, Russia, what's happening in Ukraine, the Chinese, they're doing more and more. They're spending more, triple what we're spending on their GDP for their military. We have the Syrians slaughtering people in their own country, killing Christians. We have Israel sitting there. We don't know what's going to happen with Iran moving to get a nuclear weapon. We have North Korea run by a lunatic who has nuclear weapons and long-range weapons. This world is a dangerous place. We need to make sure that the U.S. military is ready to respond anywhere around the world to protect America, to protect us. So, again, reform is important. You can find some spending cuts there, but keep a strong military.
Thank you. Mr. Halverson, finally, what are your views on military spending, and can substantial savings be achieved without jeopardizing national security?
Well, my first comment is to Mr. Schuster, who's been there almost 14 years and has touted that he's sitting on the House Armed Services Committee. What have you been doing, Mr. Schuster, for that time? We have those problems. Why haven't we been fixing them? I served 29 years in the military, went to many military services. I had an unlimited purchasing warrant as a contracting officer along the way, as well as flying search and rescue. I went to the United States Air War College, studied international military strategy. I served in Washington, D.C. and reformed the United States Coast Guard as the Director of Transformation. I was also Director of Plans and Policy, and I did all the forward-looking business planning and budget planning for the Coast Guard. And so I have a very intimate insight into military planning and military budgeting. And certainly there is room for improvement, but it is a very precise process, I want to assure you. And the problem is not so much with the military, it's with the politicians, the people in Congress who take the plans that are presented by the military in their budget, and then they decide, how much of this can I get from my district? How much can I trade with you to get this for you and that for me? And it's a corrupt process, and it destroys what is otherwise a very clean process. So yes, there are cuts that could be made. There is fat, there is waste. I'll make one proposal. There's a $50 billion medical budget in DOD. $50 billion. Now, I'm all for taking care of people, but we don't need $50 billion of socialized medicine to preserve the medical care and provide quality medical care for our veterans and our military people. That's the place where I would be proposing health savings accounts and patient-centered medical care for our veterans and for our military members.
Time. Mr. Schuster, opportunity to respond.
Sure. The last 12 years, we've been fighting 2 wars. It's very difficult when you're fighting a war to go into the Department of Defense budgets and reform and cut things. So we've been fighting a war, making sure our war fighters have what they need so they can be safer on the battlefield, so they can get the job done. But on top of that, in the Armed Services Committee, I was the one that led the charge to cut the MEADS. $800 billion is what they want to spend. We're trying to push that back, but we're getting big pushback from the Department of Defense. The other side of the ledger is the Department of Defense. They have pet projects, and we're fighting very hard to cut some of those.
Thank you. Third question, and Congressman Schuster, you're first up on this one. What is the federal government's role in public education, and what is your opinion or your stand on Common Core?
Well, first of all, I oppose Common Core, every aspect of it. The role of the federal government is not in education. That belongs to the states and the local governments, and I've advocated that for my time in Congress. Let's turn back. Let's push back to the states and locals. The money that they receive from the federal government, which is limited, make sure they're responsible with it, but let's cut that back. Let's make sure that our states have the ability to educate their children that they want. If anything, the federal government should be a very, very small clearinghouse of ideas, saying, look what Utah's done and how important that's been, and share it with the other states. But to have this big bloated bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. started under Jimmy Carter, that's wrong. We need to cut that back. It's the states where it is. My daughter's a teacher. She teaches second graders. She used to teach kids with autism. And you go into those classes and you see what's going on, and her frustration is with the level upon level of bureaucracy, the things she has to do, when if she were left to the school and herself were left to do it, they could do a much better job of moving forward. But we have this layer upon layer of federal regulations forcing our states, our local governments to do things that cost money and don't improve education. So the role of the federal government, the education, should be pushed back to the states. Continue to push back, let our states do it, because one size doesn't fit all. And that seems to be the mentality in Washington, D.C. You put a government program, what's good for Pennsylvania is good for Mississippi. That's just not true. One size doesn't fit all. We've got to give the states the flexibility, the local governments to get the flexibility to make sure that they're doing what's right for our children. And that's making sure they know how to read, they know how to write, and they know arithmetic. Thank you.
Mr. Halverson, what is the federal government's role in public education, and what is your opinion or stand on Common Core?
Common Core has to be shut down, it has to be defunded and stopped. Mr. Schuster just made an eloquent argument for defederalizing transportation, and I agree with that. I'd like to see him make the similar argument to defederalize transportation. It's for the same reasons. The federal role is not stated for education in Article 1, Section 8, where it lays out the duties of Congress. It does not call for the establishment of a Department of Education. That has been usurped from the states and needs to be returned to the states. Local school boards and parents need to be deciding what is best for their children's education. I agree with public schools, private schools, parochial schools, home schools, cyber schools. We need choice in education at the local level. We need to eliminate the mandates that are coming out of Washington, with a little bit of money, just enough to entice people to take the money, and then when they do, they get the whole gaggle of mandates that come with it, which then they have to pay for out of local funding sources. It's a disaster. It's a recipe for disaster. It has to be stopped, and one of the things I would pursue is a defederalization of education at the federal level.
And Mr. Schooley, what is the federal government's role in education and your opinion or stand on Common Core?
There is no constitutional mandate for federal-driven education. I think our country was a great country whenever our children were being taught in little one-room schoolhouses. In many ways, they were taught more about living life than they are today. I am against Common Core. There's a danger in any government driving the curriculum. Is it propaganda? That's a good question. I've seen some pretty disturbing things online. How math is being conducted and about students not learning the foundations of our country. We'll have students not know who George Washington was. That's a grave mistake. A country who has forgotten where they come from, they don't know who they are today, and they won't know where they're going. So we're blessed with a nation, our founders, the first in the world, the only in the world that acknowledged our rights come from God. That's what we risk with this. So, but it seems that our good congressman is against federal-driven education. But not too long ago, we had No Child Left Behind. And sadly, my congressman supported No Child Left Behind. I haven't found too many teachers that are in support of that. It's too much paperwork. It's testing-oriented. Our students are not learning. No Child Left Behind could be called No Child Out Ahead. So I'm not sure why there's a change of tune at this point in time, but maybe it's an election year. I don't know. But anyway, so no constitutional authority for education.
Thank you. The topic just came up in Mr. Halverson's response, and instead of going into rebuttals, I'd like to form a question here that we don't have in the stack from the audience and ask each of the candidates to talk about federal transportation issues. This will be the question: what should be the extent of the Fed's role in transportation issues? And we'll start, as the fourth question, we'll start with Mr. Halverson.
The federal role in transportation needs to be minimized. The only constitutional site is the building of post roads. That was done a long time ago. And then, of course, we built a federal interstate system under the rubric of a defense highway system, and that's been completed. Yet the money continues to flow to Washington, and all kinds of mischief happens with that money. To give you a sense of the scope, the pump tax for cars is 18.4 cents. That rolls up into Washington, even though it's collected here in Pennsylvania, to the tune of approximately $40 billion a year. But the Highway Trust Fund, which is overseen by Mr. Schuster, spends close to $50 billion a year. Mischief? Or is there another word for that? That's a good example of overspending. When you send the money to Washington, they can't think about budgeting and priorities and managing to budget. They only think about how much more can we spend than what we have, and then where do we get the money to make up the difference. That's where vehicle mileage tax has been put on the table, and is still on the table, except perhaps for this year it's been taken off, but for the long term, Mr. Schuster has been very clear about supporting a vehicle mileage tax, which I've called a track-in tax, because it's a black box that will go into your car, and it will report ostensibly to the IRS how many miles you've driven. So for a rural district like the 9th Congressional District, you've got to be out of your mind to be supporting something like that, where people have to drive to get a loaf of bread, and they're going to have to pay tax for the miles that they drive. It doesn't work up here. It's working for somebody else somewhere else, and that's why I say Mr. Schuster is no longer our congressman. He's representing other parts of the country.
Mr. Schooley, second to respond. What should be the extent of the Fed's role in transportation issues?
If we go back to history, Washington and Jefferson were in support of Route 40 that linked the Appalachian region with the eastern coast. So that opinion started very early and continued on with Dwight Eisenhower in 1956. He felt that when he seen what was occurring in Germany and they used the Autobahn for our allied forces, that it was a matter of national security, and hence the Highway Trust Fund began. Right now they spend around $42 billion. Only 2/3 is used for roads and bridges. $16 billion of it is used for pet projects, trolleys, commuter rails, metropolitan land use planning, things that would boggle your mind. And now, this year, the road portion of that Highway Trust Fund is going to go broke in September. Meanwhile, we have bridges. Pennsylvania, which is the third highest number of bridges in the country, 50 years old. They need replaced. Corbett can't do it. That's why we have maintenance contracts, 99 years, for the maintenance of those bridges. We're selling the infrastructure out from underneath our feet. That's how bad it is. We have our assets out in the front yard, and we have a big yard sale. No nation does that unless they're in trouble. Now, not too recently here, 2012, there was H.R. 4348 and H.R. 5972. Bill Schuster did vote to increase for spending for Amtrak and did remove the cap on the Highway Trust Fund for highways. So he's been part of the problem with spending too much money with the transportation realm, just like every other department. We need to limit the spending based on the gas tax. And if we can't do it, we're going to have to send it elsewhere to the states.
Congressman Schuster.
Well, first of
Have
all,
at
Mr. Halverson continues to put forward this vehicle miles traveled. We've discussed it, but I've said it is not going to happen. The biggest problem with it is that the government can possibly track you. So I've rejected it. There's only one bill in Congress with one person on it. I have not signed onto it. I've rejected it. But let's go back to the Constitution and the founding of this country. Transportation, I believe, and infrastructure is one of the few things the federal government should be involved in. And you take it right back to the founding of this country. The Articles of Confederation, one of the biggest reasons they failed was because Virginia and Maryland couldn't come together with a contract, or excuse me, a treaty to navigate the Potomac River to get to western Pennsylvania into the Ohio Territory. And they came away from those failed negotiations and realized if we can't promote commerce, if we can't connect this nation, we will never be a nation. We'll just be an alliance of different states. And so they changed the Constitution and they said post roads. Post roads were the transportation, the commercial way to communicate in the days of the 1780s and 90s. It's fundamental. You look at Jefferson with the canals he was proposing to build. You look at Abraham Lincoln. He built the Transcontinental Railroad to connect this great nation together. It was Abraham Lincoln that did that, a fine Republican, I might add. It was Theodore Roosevelt that said the need for the Panama Canal was there, and the federal government should be involved to help that go forward, to cut down the time from west to east, to make our nation even greater than it was. And Eisenhower, he didn't do that just because of national defense, although he saw it when he traveled after World War I. He saw how long it took to get across this nation on a patchwork of roads. He saw what the Germans could do to defend their nation, and he came back when he became president and said, we've got to do this. It'll not only protect the nation, it'll propel our economy, and it's just done just that. This is, as a businessman, this is what businesses invest in. This is what nations should invest in their infrastructure, in their physical plants to make us more productive, to make us stronger. So, ladies and gentlemen, I reject the fact that the Constitution doesn't have in it the need for transportation.
Thank you. The next question, and the first to respond, Travis Schooley, and it's shortened to the point. If elected, will you vote yes or no to retain John Boehner as Majority Leader?
No, I will not.
Congressman Schuster.
When we get back to Washington and see what the makeup of the United States Congress is, I will make a decision then. But what we need to do is get rid of Harry Reid in the United States Senate, and we have an opportunity in this election if Republicans work together to elect Republicans to control the U.S. Senate.
And Mr. Halverson, will you vote yes or no to retain John Boehner as Majority Leader?
I will absolutely not vote to retain John Boehner. We need leadership in Congress, and John Boehner is not the leader. He's the third most in succession, senior person in the United States government, and he appears to have no leadership ability. He has allowed our Republican caucus to fracture. He has not laid out a plan. There is no vision in the Republican Party, and John Boehner is singly responsible, but along with him, his lieutenants like Mr. Schuster and others who are serving on that leadership group.
Congressman, respond on that at all?
Once again, the problem in Washington, D.C., John Boehner and the Republican Conference has cut spending 4 times in a row. Not since Korea War has that happened. We've also spent many, many bills, hundreds of bills to the United States Senate. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody in America can look at the United States Congress and see that it's Harry Reid and Barack Obama. That's the real problem. So this fall, instead of Republicans beating up on Republicans, let's get together and win the United States Senate back so we can get something done and put bills and laws on Barack Obama's desk so that he can sign them or veto them, but put the pressure on him to do it, not let Harry Reid let him be a scapegoat.
Okay, Mr. Schuster, you're first on question number 6 this evening.
Who is?
You're first. Your thoughts on Obamacare and what optional health care initiatives would you propose if instead?
Well, as somebody who ran a business in central Pennsylvania for 13 years, somebody that employed 30 to 40 people, provided them with health care, I've seen firsthand the benefits of a good health care plan to people. And I see those workers that worked for me work so hard and making sure that they had a good, decent plan. But when I saw this health care plan coming, when I saw it coming 3 and 4 or 5 years ago, I knew it was wrong for America. I knew there was nothing more than an attempt for the government to take over health care. Now, Barack Obama didn't get what he wanted. He wants one-payer system. So he had to step back and get something a little less. But make no mistake about it, this is a disaster waiting to happen. That's why I've voted 50 times to try to stop it. I've offered legislation to try to stop the IRS from being able to enforce this. This is something that's it's causing us right now economic damage. The American people don't realize it yet because they haven't seen some of them have seen their premiums go up, some of them have seen them lose it. But when those premiums start to come out, projections next October, November, the American people are going to really see this and what it is and how harmful it is. It's taking away the choice from American people. It's taking away the patient-doctor relationship. It is not putting anything in there to create choice and competition to drive down costs. And that's why I offered, and I wrote 4 or 5 years ago an op-ed talking just about that, how we needed to need choice so that people could choose their own doctors, their own plans. And when you have choice, you have competition, and that drives prices down. Allowing that relationship between the doctor and the patient, that's about a doctor to patient. It's not to have some bureaucrat in Washington decide if you can get a knee operation or not. It's about tort reform so that we stop our doctors, so our doctors stop having to do tests so that they have to cover themselves if they get sued by somebody. Those are the kinds of common sense practices to put forward, letting people buy across state lines, just like we do life insurance and auto insurance. Those are the things that will drive down the cost of health care in this country, and that's what I've advocated for.
Next, Mr. Halverson, your thoughts on Obamacare and what optional health care initiatives would you propose?
I'm intrigued that now Mr. Schuster has voted 50 times against Obamacare. Einstein would call that insanity. Keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. I assume you're expecting a different result. It used to be 42 times, now it's 50 times. When in fact the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, we have Obamacare because Mr. Schuster and many other of our own party have voted to fund Obamacare 10 times. He's voted to fund Obamacare 10 times. That's why it's still in place. That's unacceptable. Under Mr. Boehner's leadership and Mr. Schuster's leadership, all they can do is point to Mr. Reid and Mr. Obama. It's time for us to look within our own party and see what's wrong with our own party, why we have not put forward a single unified health care alternative to Obamacare. Has anyone ever heard of one? I published one. Mr. Schuster wrote an op-ed 4 or 5 years ago. Great, thank you. I published a framework myself. Bobby Jindal has one in Louisiana. And yet the leadership in the House of Representatives has failed to put forward a unified alternative to Obamacare. It's time, folks. It's time for us to repeal Obamacare and replace it with a patient-centered, free market-based health care plan that includes many of the features that have already been mentioned tonight. But we need to start imparting some leadership in Congress and stop blaming Harry Reid and Obama. Sure, they're bad. They need to be defeated. There's no question about that. But stop pointing at somebody else and let's look within our own house and see what's wrong with our own leadership. It's because we have the wrong people in charge in the House. And I intend to go up to Congress and replace that leadership with authentic conservatives who will, in fact, develop a strategy, publish a plan, and then pursue that plan single-mindedly until we take our country back and fix and recover and rescue what's from ourselves from what we've brought about and put ourselves at risk.
The last to make the direct answer to the question, please, Mr. Schooley, your thoughts on Obamacare and what health care initiatives would you propose?
I'm diametrically opposed to Obamacare. 3 good reasons. The government can't manage anything, 1. 2, Ronald Reagan quote, one of the traditional methods of imposing statism or socialism on the people has been by way of medicine. Number 3, the last century, more people were murdered by their own government than had ever lived in the world from the beginning of history to that point. That should be troubling. Now, what I'd like to know is why the House buckled down to President Obama and voted in a reconciliation bill that made it law. Now, I know Bill was not a part of that, but I don't know if you know the story, how it happened. First, we had the Veterans Home Mortgage Tax Relief Act of 2009, which was voted for by the House, and it was slid over to the Senate, and the Senate added in the ACA, like magic. There's something in this bill that has nothing to do with the other bill, and this highlights the problem we have in Washington, D.C. So then, President Obama grandstands and demands that the House buckle down and do this. So they used the reconciliation process. This should never have been. Then the Supreme Court says that you can't penalize people, but it's only constitutional if it's a tax. So where was the question? Only the House of Representatives can levy a tax on the people. Why was it not scratched and started over? But I am for shredding every bit of Obamacare, whether it's a piece, a limb, or all of it altogether, in favor of a free market alternative that's individual-based and that rewards the individual for doing the good shopping for their health care. I'm not sure how to do it. I guess no one else is either, because it's why it's not done.
2 minutes. Into the rebuttal round, Representative Schuster.
Well, sure. I would encourage Mr. Halverson to read 2 things. One, read my op-ed piece from 3 or 4 years ago, because you'll find that his ideas are many of the ideas I had and many Republicans. He's not have one single new idea that he's offering up in his health care. It's nice to say it, but it's not. He doesn't have any ideas. The second thing I'd ask him to read is the Constitution, to understand how Congress works. The House has to pass something, the Senate has to pass something. And if they're not passing it, it doesn't have a chance to become law. And the problem in the United States Congress is Harry Reid, everything dies in the United States Senate. That's why we have an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity for Republicans to work hard to win back the United States Senate. Because if that happens, you will see a lot of the good legislation that we passed in the House go to the Senate and make it to the President's desk. And then the President in the Constitution has a choice to veto it or sign it into law. And then it has to come back for a 2/3 vote. So read the Constitution, read my op-ed. I think you'll learn a lot.
Any response on that, Mr. Halverson, on the operations of the Congress?
I am sick and tired of hearing excuses from the leadership in the House of Representatives. They have to be replaced. There's no reconciliation with these people. They don't understand leadership. All they can do is blame, point fingers, and try to skirt out from their pathetic record. That's what's going on. It has to change. This is our chance to change it on May 20th, 2014.
Okay. The next question, and the first to respond will be Mr. Halverson. What would your approach be to addressing the issue of illegal immigration? Do you believe there's a shortage of skilled American workers? The questioner seems to tie the issues together there. Illegal immigration and do you believe there's a shortage of skilled American workers?
My position on immigration is secure the border and enforce the existing law. We have adequate existing laws, including temporary work visas and other mechanisms whereby we can acquire all the necessary temporary workers legally to work in the various sectors where traditionally we have employed temporary workers. I don't believe there's a shortage of workers. I believe there's a shortage of work ethic, and we need to address that from a social perspective. But there certainly are enough unemployed people that we're paying welfare dollars to who are able-bodied, and I believe we should not be paying people who can work to not work. My daughter is a missionary in Honduras, and Honduras is one of the poorest countries in the world. She works and teaches at an orphanage there. She's there on a visa. Every 90 days she has to leave the country for 36 hours, have her visa restamped to re-enter the country so that she, as an American teacher, could go in and teach the poor children of Honduras English. If Honduras can do it, America can do it. I'm all for compassion, and we need to do that. But there are easy ways, I believe, to fix the problem in America of illegal immigration. And I'm moving on perhaps to a different part of this question. But those that are here illegally need to identify themselves. They need to be placed into a status where they are paying to be here illegally. I don't think there's enough will to deport folks like that, and there's some compassion issues that are involved, but these people need to be identified, and they need to be paying for the right to be here, such that the illegal aspect of it is reduced and eliminated, and I think we can do that, and I would work towards that end, because some of the solutions that are being offered by the current Republican leadership in the House are unacceptable to me.
Mr. Schooley, what would be your approach to addressing the issue of illegal immigration, and do you believe there's a shortage of skilled American workers?
If you ask our agricultural sector if there's a shortage of workers, they'll tell you yes. And they'll tell you that Americans are not working as hard as the people that they bring in to do the job. Now, there's the pay that people get when they come here is low by American standards, but much higher by theirs. So there's an economic difference there in the willingness to work. Now, I managed a municipal authority. Now, that was sanitary sewer, otherwise known by other names. But we paid our workers a wage that they could raise a family on. They never hesitated to jump in a wet well and shovel someone else's excrement. That's not a glorious job. I've done it myself. So I think American workers would do the work. We have a choice. We have to pay the rate that the free market would dictate to do that type of work, but we'd all have to be willing to accept higher prices to do it. And then our domestic growers would not be competitive on a world market, so we'd probably have to protect them. But there's another answer too, and that is to work with the existing H-visa laws and get the workers in to match those workers up with the employers. And George Bush had a plan for that, and that plan did not give those H-visa people preference to streamlining them in as being citizens. But don't couple the two issues. They don't have to be coupled to begin with. And rest assured, when it comes to immigration, I believe what most of you believe in this room. First, defend the borders, secure the borders. Two, they're not following the law. We need to change that. So we also need to do a better job on the border. Our borders are porous. That's a national security threat.
2 minutes. Thank you. Representative Schuster, same question. What will be your approach to addressing the issue of illegal immigration, and along with that, do you believe there's a shortage of skilled American workers?
Well, first, I have to agree with Mr. Halverson. I think there's a shortage of work ethic in this country, and one of the things that causes that is the social welfare programs that we give to people to reward them to not go to work. One of the things that I voted for, and we tried to pass it through the Senate, couldn't do it, is to drug test people who are on welfare, who are on unemployment, to say to them that if you're going to be at home, if you're going to be unemployed, you better not be on drugs, you better not be doing illegal things. That's number one. Make sure those government benefits they get are tested, and make sure that they're not just given freely to encourage them to stay home and work. Now, immigration, first of all, if I start off with, there shouldn't be any amnesty or consideration for amnesty to these folks. In securing our border, as Mr. Schooley has said, it is a national security issue. People can get through this border. We've got to make sure we're closing down the border to see who's coming and going in this country. And third, have reforms. To have the reforms that if you're going to be in this country as an immigrant, you ought to have some kind of ID card. So it's real easy for the local dairyman down the road to have a worker come in, and he can run it through now with an iPad or some of these electronic devices to see, is he here legally or not legally? Because I know a local farmer, and I talk to lots and lots of farmers, because this district is the largest agricultural district in Pennsylvania. And I don't talk to any farmer that doesn't say, there's a shortage of workers. Whether it's the orchard growers, the dairymen, you name it, they need workers. And so a good close friend of mine told me one time that he's looking at all this paperwork to hire what appears to be a legal immigrant, and he can't tell the difference. So what we need is a card to be able to say, this person's here legally or they're not. That helps stop the problem significantly. And also penalize significantly businesses that are hiring illegals. Penalize them not to the tunes of a couple thousand, but 50 or 60. Make it painful so that they will not hire these illegals, because that's the flame that attracts them. That's the flame for economic opportunity to get to this country. So we've got to, those are the things we have to do to reform immigration and stop illegal immigration in this country.
First, to answer the next question, Mr. Schooley, and it seems a little baited. The question is, how do you propose to rein in the IRS if it needs to be reined in, I guess?
Well, I'm of the prevailing opinion that every government agency needs reined in at this point. And that's a big problem for Congress. Now, I'm not in Congress yet, but looking at it from the outside, it seems to me that we are losing our ability to control these agencies. Sure, we control the purse strings, but what are they doing from a day-to-day basis? So, by and large, government agencies are running rampant, and there's very little to no accountability over anything. The IRS is no different. So now, one of the quickest ways we could rein in the IRS is probably shred the tax code. We could take 77,000 pages down and make it a simple plan, a simple flat tax plan, probably in a range of 15 to 20%. But we should, I believe, as a conservative, as a fiscal conservative, put downward pressure on the size of government, because our government is too large to maintain for the private sector that is out there now. And they're not productive. They draw from the productivity of the people and make less money for savings and investment and spending. And in the end, we end up with less freedom. Am I done? Okay.
I think we're still good.
Okay. I didn't look down for a while. But no, so if we instituted a flat tax, we could probably shred the IRS pretty effectively, I think.
Okay. Mr. Schuster, how about that IRS?
Well, I think all of us realize that the targeting of conservative groups by the IRS is one of the most egregious acts that I think I've seen happen in this country in many, many years. And this president refuses to arrest or prosecute the people that are responsible for that. Congress we're holding hearings, oversight hearings, to try to shed light on the truth, but it's the executive branch that has the power to arrest people. It's the executive branch that has the FBI and the Justice Department to prosecute people. But Congress has to continue to keep the pressure up. And what's happened over these years is we have given up our Constitution, our congressional authority given to us by the Constitution, given it to the executive branch. Sometimes it's in times of national emergency. Sometimes it's this big fight that goes on between the executives and the Congress. But we have got to reestablish the legislative branch as the key branch of government that determines how things are run, how the money is spent. Those are the kinds of things we have to put back in place. And it's going to take, obviously, an act of Congress to do this. And as I keep saying, this fall we have a tremendous opportunity. And I think we will be able to take back the United States Senate and have the two houses working together, coordinated effort to do things like rein in the IRS and put legislation on the president's desk, force his hand. But to continue to get the American people behind these efforts is absolutely critical.
And Mr. Halverson.
Well, what's even more critical is for the House of Representatives to actually do what they're paid to do. It's time for them to start impeaching some of these officials at IRS. It's time for them to be exerting some of the power that they already have, but seem to be unwilling to exercise. I'm sick and tired of hearing about what we need to do. Mr. Schuster, you've been there almost 14 years. It's too late to be saying what we need to do. Let's hear about what you have not done. It's time wasted. And we are in this critical situation with Obamacare, with a fiscal cliff, a debt ceiling that's ready to blow up, with a nation in crisis, in turmoil. And we have a do-nothing Congress led by our own party, who was put in place by the Tea Party in 2010, and they've failed to respond in a way that they should have when we gave them the power back, because we put the wrong people in charge. It's time to change the people who are in charge and let Congress be Congress again, exercise the power that they have constitutionally. They simply are not willing to do it with the current leadership cadre. It's time to change them.
Mr. Schuster, any response on that? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. And Mr. Schuster's first to respond on this question. In our economy, the questioner says, small business owners are struggling to compete. What can be done to help build our economic base to promote growth?
Well, as the only small business owner who's operated a business and employed people, 30 to 40 people up here tonight, I have a unique understanding of that. We have got to get back government off from the regulatory regime, from the tax burden that we put on our small businesses. That's where the job creation occurs. I mentioned earlier about the Department of Defense and the great innovation that occurs, the breakthrough that occur in these small and medium-sized businesses. That's where we have to focus, and we've got to unchain our small businesses. We've got to unchain them from the burdens they have to face with these regulatory burdens that don't make sense. Reduce the tax code, make sure it's easier. We spend so much money as a small business owner, spending so much money trying to figure out the tax code every year, when if it was flatter and fair, which we've proposed and tried to move, would make a big difference on the economy. Because the way to get ourselves out of this economic problem that we have is control the economy, or control spending, cut spending, reduce regulation, but you have to grow the economy. That's the great prescription to get ourselves back on track, to significantly reduce this deficit, is to grow the economy. And as I said, as a small business owner, I saw firsthand what's going on. I see right now, as talking to a coal operator, and this war on coal that Obama has put forth. They just came out today with the Labor Department saying they're going to reduce the amount of dust that's allowed in a coal mine to reduce black lung. But the problem is that the coal operators have said, we'll put different equipment on to solve that problem. The other problem is there's no technology to measure it. So they're not going to be able to measure it. So this is just another ploy by the Obama administration to kill coal, and it's hurting businesses, and we've got to stop that.
Mr. Halverson, in the context of small business struggles, what can be done to build the economic base and promote growth?
There's several things that can be done. The EPA has been mentioned. The EPA needs to be rolled back. They need to be eliminated, frankly, because we already have a duplicate at every state level that controls the environmental protection legislation and rules within the state, and we need to eliminate the federal role in EPA. They have clearly gone way beyond any conceived benefit. We need an energy-led economic recovery. We are sitting right now in this room on the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. America has now the largest oil reserves in the world, and yet none of those things are available on public lands, at least to the extent that offshore oil drilling leases are not being brought on the market. We have restrictions on gas drilling. It's preventing the extraction at the rate at which we would need to lead a boom in energy recovery. We have a corporate tax in this country of 29%, which is the highest in the world. It's tied with a country that I can't even pronounce the name of. And we cannot reach an agreement to reduce that corporate tax rate. What that does is create multinationals like GE. Their profits are held offshore to the tune of trillions of dollars, and they're not brought onshore because they would be facing a 29% tax. That is unconscionable. And so all that capital that could be invested in this country, in our infrastructure, in our businesses, and creating jobs, is held offshore and creating jobs in other countries. It doesn't make sense. And it's past time for excuses. It's time for Congress to act. There are concrete things that can be done. Pressure can be brought to approve the Keystone Pipeline, another energy-led measure that can be taken. It's time to act.
And Mr. Schooley, finally, as small businesses struggle to compete, what can be done to help build the economic base and promote growth?
Many things. Number one, Congress is in bed with big business to destroy small business. Number two, federal regulations. They're way too encompassing. Simplifying the tax code will save many hours and many accounting hours on doing your taxes, both for individuals and for businesses. Cutting taxes in general, bringing the size of government down, would be another one, because there'd be more money for everybody to go around, and that would bolster business. But I'll take aim at one more thing. If we want to put part of the blame on why our jobs are now parked in China and India or wherever else they are, it's because of the free trade agreements. Since CAFTA, we've lost 1 in 9 manufacturing jobs. The trade deficit for China instantly soared through the roof when China entered into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Now, that was Bud, your father. But now for CAFTA, figures show 61% net job losses due to trade with Mexico. So the job losses for Pennsylvania have been pretty dire, but the job losses as a country have been dire. And why? Because we can't compete with people who are essentially slaves in other countries unless we're going to live the way they live. And I don't think anybody here wants that. So I take aim at the free trade agreements for being part of that issue too. So it's a five-fold thing that I see, and maybe even more. Thanks.
Any response? Okay, and the next question, and Mr. Halverson will be the first to respond, and this one's to the point too. What's your position on gun control and the Second Amendment?
I define gun control as 2 hands held steady, taking aim and pulling the trigger. That's gun control. Anything else is tyranny. The Second Amendment is very clear about those rights not being infringed upon. And yet we have states in this country, we have people at the national level, even in the Supreme Court, whose single target is to take away our guns. We have to fight vehemently for that. We have an NRA, and incidentally, Mr. Schuster has been endorsed by the NRA recently. Because he's the incumbent, they're a single-issue organization. They automatically endorse him. But that being said, we have got to, as a nation and as a Congress, make it very clear to fight for our rights. We have to have people in Congress who will stand up and be a voice for the people of central Pennsylvania and the country to preserve the right of every man and woman to bear arms, who are within, obviously without felons and others included in that. But my wife and I each have a concealed weapons permit. We have multiple weapons. I defend the right of every person who is in a legal status to maintain their arms. We have got to be vigilant about this. There's a reason the Second Amendment is right behind the First Amendment. It's to protect our right to assembly and to free speech and to religion. It's a critical, critical right that must be defended, and we must be talking about it. And it's not a local issue, it's a national issue. It's one which we will regret if we don't take the proactive steps, every one of us who cares about our country, to defend the Second Amendment.
Mr. Schooley, your position on gun control and the Second Amendment.
I say it often, so goes the second, goes the rest. If we don't have the second, we don't have any of the others. We should thank God for the gun that's in our gun cabinet and thank our neighbor for the gun that's in his or hers. Because without it today, I don't believe we'd be free, even to the point where we are today. And we all know the story of World War II, where the Japanese were contemplating invading the West Coast, but they didn't. It's because there was a gun behind every blade of grass. And it's the same reason no one will ever step foot here. There's way too many guns. And I thank God for that, because that is a basic, bare bones national security element. So I'm a hunter, and I shoot for recreation when I have time. I don't have a whole lot of that lately, but as you can probably understand. But no, I'm absolutely staunch Second Amendment rights, and it's that simple, period.
And Mr. Schuster, Second Amendment and gun control.
Well, I agree that the Second Amendment is one of the most important amendments we have, and it must be defended. One of the facts that Mr. Halverson left out about the NRA endorsement is I am the incumbent, but I have a 100% voting record to defend the Second Amendment. That's why the NRA supports me, because I'm down there fighting for that Second Amendment right. And I think if you look around the world, you see nations that have given up the right to own guns, they lose their freedoms. So that's an important issue, to keep our freedoms, to make sure that the American people have that right. And giving it to people like in D.C., in Washington, D.C., where for years they weren't allowed to have weapons. And then Congress allowed them to have it. We had a big fight through the courts, and now they're able to own weapons. And what used to be, I don't know the current statistics, the murder capital of the world, the nation's capital. Washington, D.C. at one time, if not still today, the murder capital of the world. Some of the strictest gun laws in Chicago, in Detroit, in Washington. That's where most of the violence occurs. When you have a conceal and carry, allow people to do that, that's where the crime rates go down, because the bad guys know there could be a good guy in there. And I believe it was Wayne LaPierre said, the only way you stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, or gal with a gun. And so it's important that we keep this right. It's from the very beginning of our nation's founding, it's been important to the core of who we are and what we do. So I will continue to have 100% voting right. And I'll tell you, I thank the NRA for their support, because we work and we fight every time that it comes up to make sure we defend that Second Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, and Mr. Schooley will be the first to respond. Explain what expertise you have that the other two candidates do not possess. In other words, what are your, we'll each ask each of you, what are your unique qualifications to be the 9th District Congressional Representative?
Well, I'll add first and foremost, I'm the only guy born and raised here. I think that's, for me, that seems important. Number two, my military background. As an intelligence analyst, I worked on national and theater level priorities. So I got to see a lot of things and learn a lot of things, and that contributes to my background there in understanding the military and the what we see overseas and where we need to have assets. I was in the electronic intelligence warfare area and also cross-trained on battlefield analysis. Thirdly, like I said in my opener, for the past dozen years, especially for my last 20 years working history, I have been at the local level. And I have been working with enough agencies to make me want to beat my head against the wall nearly every day. And that includes the Army Corps of Engineers, DEP, DCNR, all the habitat studies for toads and frogs, you name it. I've done environmental phase 1 reports. I've written construction specifications that have been codified as ordinances for water line construction, been involved in sewer line construction, and that paperwork, for me, Congress is about paperwork, less about speaking and grandstanding, and more about rolling your sleeves up and reading what's in those bills. Voluminous bills. In my opinion, there's been very little from Washington, D.C. that's been good for the people of this country in a long time. So my experience is at the local level, and I understand the local level issues more than either one of these two candidates. I can guarantee it.
And Mr. Schuster, what expertise do you have?
Well-
Your unique qualifications?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, we live in the greatest country in the world. And in this country, our Constitution doesn't put out, except for being 25 years old, being in the House, and being a citizen here in the United States, it doesn't have a requirement for you have to be a lawyer or a doctor. And in fact, when you go to the United States Congress today, there are 435 people that come from all walks of life. They come from the lowest stations to the highest stations. But they go to Washington to represent their constituents. And I think that's something that's extremely important, that you come from the area, that you have a tremendous knowledge and background. Mr. Schooley mentioned he's the only one born and raised here. I was born and raised here also. My family just happened to come from the western part of the district, the Mon River Valley, just outside of the district today. But I was raised here, went to high school here, and I raised my family here. I had a business, and I think that's really the thing that separates me from the two gentlemen up here on the stage today. I had a business in this district in rural Pennsylvania that employed between 30 and 40 people, depending on how the economy was. I saw the ups and the downs. I saw the trials and the tribulations. I sat with my workers who were having trouble and tried to help them through tough times. So I know the people here. I've traveled this district. I've grown up here. I can go to just about any place in this district, and I know intimately the details of what's happening. And if I don't, I find somebody that I can learn from. So I think that's what separates me here, this broad knowledge of the district and the ability to connect with the people here, because I'm from here, because I raised my family here, I had a business here, and I've represented this area now for the past 12 years, and I've become intimately involved with the local issues, working with constituents that come to my office that have problems with a department in the federal government, and our job is to be there to help them, to work with them, to get through that problem, to solve their problem, to explain to them how they can get this undone. And working with the communities, the community that Mr. Schooley works with down in Franklin County. We've worked with them to try to solve their problems, to get them, help them through the burdens of the federal government that cause them to spend more money to do things that just isn't right.
Time. Thank you. And finally, Mr. Halverson, what do you bring to the table? Your expertise, your unique qualification.
I would offer first and foremost leadership, which is what I see missing the most in Congress. We have to have somebody who can go to Congress and understand how to solve problems, understand how to break problems down, how to bring people together, how to reach an agreement and get something done. I don't hear that from our current leadership in Congress, and we need to put somebody up there who can do that. I also have expertise in the military. I mentioned earlier my 29-year active duty career. I drove icebreakers. I flew helicopters doing search and rescue. I had a unlimited contracting warrant I mentioned, and I served in the senior levels of the United States military. I understand that world. It's most critical for the federal government to have veterans in Congress who understand the ins and outs of the military society and the military duties, and I can bring that to Congress. I too am a businessman, Mr. Schuster, and you know that. I'm an investor and a commercial developer, and I'm intricately involved in the local issues because when you're investing in building real estate and developing commercial office buildings, medical buildings, shopping plazas, and so forth, you've got to know the local rules and regulations, what phase ones are, how to process deals, how to finance purchases and sales. It's an intricate business of financial dealings that have to be understood, or you're going to lose your shirt and you're going to take a lot of other people down with you. I've been successful in that world because I've developed expertise in that field. So I've worked very closely with and offered leadership in the parachurch arena as well, serving as president of a national 16,000-member organization. I've had expertise and experience across a wide array of entities, And I look forward to bringing those skills together in representing you in Congress.
This is the point where we get to what they would call a closing statement, and that often lends itself to an opportunity to do a lot of rehash, but I would like to offer it to you, your closing statements in the form of this question. Is there anything you were expecting us to ask that we didn't? And we'll start with Congressman Schuster.
I thought I closed. I opened, so I got final.
You're
Closing?
next in the rotation, yes.
Is this the close?
This is the last question.
I opened, so I thought I got the close. I thought that was the agreement.
If you'd like to defer.
I think you ought to follow the rules.
Right.
Well,
Right. And you're absolutely right.
He's defining the rules.
You can interpret it.
Okay.
And I went first
Sure.
in the open, and I thought that means
Can-
that
can
I
we
was
move on?
last in the close.
okay, we can do that.
Okay.
That's no
That's what I
problem.
thought the rules were.
Okay. Mr. Halverson, is there anything we haven't asked you that you were expecting to talk about here tonight?
No, there isn't anything that I expected that you haven't asked. It's been a very broad-based approach to questioning, and I appreciate all of the input from so many people and those who worked hard to make it a broad-based questioning. I want to close with this. I love America, and you love America, I'm sure. You wouldn't be here tonight. And again, I appreciate you coming out here and listening to us and drawing your own conclusions about what's best for the future. We have a number of options here, 3 to be sure, but within those 3, various qualities that you can discern is best for our district. I want you to consider in my case that I have a broad swath of experiences I just listed. I can bring that together in the form of leadership to actually solve some problems. That's not happening, and it has to change. And if we continue to reelect the same people over and over again, we're going to get the status quo. We're going to get excuses, and we're going to hear about things that we should be doing but never seem to get done. That's not my modus of operating. I go in with a strategy, with a plan, on a mission to get it done. That's why I've pledged to serve only 6 years, 3 terms and out. Self-term limiting, because in 6 years, and that's how long I served in Washington when I reformed the Coast Guard and helped stand up an entire department, you should be burning yourself out in 6 years. Staying in for 14 years and wanting to do more means I don't think you're working hard enough. And I think we heard some of that tonight. So I covet your vote. I ask for your consideration. And I humbly ask for your vote because we have to save America. We need to rescue America. And I've done a lot of rescuing in my life, and it's time to rescue America. Thank you.
Mr. Schooley, wrap it up with anything you like.
I thank everyone for being here tonight. To be honest, I had no idea what to expect. There's a lot of things out there to read and look at. There's a lot of issues. So this was like studying for a test, but you had no idea what the subject was going to be. So, but I always rest assured in my faith, and I'm here. I'm put here for a reason, and I have a mission. I feel comfortable with what I'm doing. And I will tell you that I do believe I am qualified to represent you in Congress. And, you know, this is my deal now. This is my thing. This is my life. This is my identity, this race. And I've made it a part of myself. And I have to persevere. And what I offer here is a rare chance for people to elect a working man. A man who understands what it's like to wonder if the transmission is going to break in your truck and if you're going to be able to pay your next bill. I think that by and large, too many people in Washington, D.C. are cut from a different mold. They don't understand that. And the policies they've been formulating for us for many generations now aren't realistic. And the common people don't understand why they're losing these battles every day, every year. And they're tired of it, and they're mad. And that's why I'm here. I'm the most constitutionally conservative man on this stage, and I'm here to make sure that my children have a country to inherit at the end of the day. Because as a father, that's all I can give them. So I'll not stop. I fear no man and no thing, and I will do what I can. And when I'm done, I will leave a better Congress. I'll have to. There's no option for me. I won't rest until I do. I barely rest at all as it is now. I don't take time to eat sometimes. And I'm always reminded you have to eat something. Oh, yeah, I guess we do need to do that, don't we? But so no, I do humbly ask for your vote, and I do see a rare opportunity here. We can send a strong message to Washington, D.C. that anybody can do this. Anybody can run for office. It will bring hope to people in this country and hopefully bring more people into the political process to realize their vote does count. People stand together. We do run the shop around here. So that's my message. And I do thank you for being here tonight. So, and that's it.
Thank you. And Congressman Schuster.
Well, thank you, Chauncey, and let me start off by saying thank you to all of you for being here. This is so important, and not enough Americans get involved. Take the time to come out, read, come out, educate themselves. So this is really important, and this is you doing your citizenship, your duty as a citizen, and I appreciate that greatly. So thank you for being here tonight. Second to the two gentlemen here, Mr. Halverson, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you for your 29 years of service to the United States. We can't thank people enough that serve the United States military and do the job to keep us safe. So thank you for that, Mr. Halverson. And Travis, I want to thank you, too, for your military service and giving of yourself. And this guy, I know, he's working all the time. So I appreciate the fact that he's out here tonight driving the furthest distance to be here tonight, to participate in this great experience, this great experiment that it's American democracy. I stand here tonight before you, again, to ask for your vote so that I can continue to go to Washington and fight for your conservative values. And I think I've proven that I fight for those conservative values. I mentioned, ticked off a few numbers that proves that I have conservative. I got different groups backing me because of my conservative values. And look, I don't always make the vote that you're going to agree with, but you know what? I'll stand up and tell you that. But I think when you look at my conservative voting record, 9 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times is pretty good. And Ronald Reagan once said, I think I'm paraphrasing, if you're with me 80% of the time, you're my friend, not my enemy. But I'm with the conservatives 90% or better. I believe that everything I look at is through the conservative prism. I look at it through that of a small businessman who had a business here in central Pennsylvania, employing people. I look at it through the prism of my 2 children. My son's going to graduate from Penn State in a couple of weeks, and he's out there, he's going to start a new job, and I'm thankful that he was able to get that job. Because in these economic times, it was tough. My daughter, she teaches 2nd grade. She teaches kids, and it's such an inspiration to me to watch that. But in the United States Congress, if you decide to send me back there, I will continue to go back and fight to cut spending, control spending, cut taxes, get this economy moving. That's the way we cure our economic ills, is by a growing, expanding economy, not by trying to nationalize health care that Obama's done, something that I've fought against, making sure that the regulations are being reduced so that we can develop our own energy here in America, so that we can not be controlled by foreign countries because of energy. To be able to create those jobs, to be able to put Americans back to work, that's what I'm about. That's what I'm trying to work to continue to do in Washington. I want to thank you so very much for the great, tremendous, the support you've given me over these past years. And I, again, ask tonight for your support to go back to Washington, to continue to work to make this a better place to live and raise a family. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. The organizers received more than 60 questions, and obviously time couldn't permit us to ask all of those questions tonight, so the attempt was made to select questions that would be of common interest to all in attendance here.
Chauncey, if I could, and I'd be more than happy if you consolidate some of those and send them to me, I'd be more than happy to put out there, and I know Tom could get it out on his mail list to see if there was questions that were asked that I didn't answer. I'm happy to do that.
That's exactly what we're offering in the attempt to reach to have everyone get answers. Candidates, there probably are email addresses. There are other ways of contacting their campaign committees, their telephone numbers. You have the opportunity now to meet with them individually to find contact information and maybe ask a couple of questions that weren't asked here in the program this evening. On behalf of the organizers, thank you for attending. Election Day is May 20th. Have a good evening.
Sure.